Support for this show is brought to you by novel Till the Bitter Endemic. What if there was a happy ending to a pandemic? Perhaps an unexpected love story. After Daisy gets thrust into mandatory quarantine for an infection she can't explain, it's up to her to unravel the truth as to what's behind it and what she can ultimately do to escape it. But she can't do this alone, and that's where she finds not only herself, but a very special person that opens their heart for the betterment of their survival. Find out how in Till the Bitter Endemic. Available now on Amazon in all major formats.
Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art. I'm your host, Novo Day, and today we're going to be talking about art and, well, the arts again, with our ever-evolving open discussion segment, Is It Art? Focusing on the subtle art of storytelling in gaming, specifically in the absence of language. In other words, we're going to be discussing today how the visual language and the gameplay elements alone can effectively convey and communicate story. So there's no theses today, no gems, just unadulterated discussion. To hash things out, we're once again joined by our favorite gaming hero, and that is Mr. Philip Church of philipchurch.com. Welcome back to the show, sir.
A gaming episode featuring Philip? What?
I know. It's like you pitched it at our pitch meeting, and it actually stuck to the board, and we're like, you know what? God, that's
what
a great
is this,
idea.
2024 again?
That's a great idea. And before we go on break, I do have, I got a little banner for you, a little surprise improv banner, because as I was preparing for the show, I was thinking to myself, man, Philip threw us a really great idea for a show in our pitch meeting. And then at the same time, I realized, wait a minute, isn't this the guy that is building an entire career on his voice and acting and language and words and wanting to be the very opposite of what we're talking about today? So I'm like, so what? So my question is, what drew you to this topic?
Well, very well put, in that I do very much have a career that I've made out of using words, using language to tell stories. But if you want to get a little nerdy about it and kind of look a little layer deeper, it's that there's pretty much some sort of emotion, even if you're talking nonfiction, where you can talk about accomplishment or tragedy, devastation, things like that. And then obviously in fiction, you've got all kinds of outrageous plots, very dramatic things, crazy, bizarre murders, like love triangles, all that whatnot. So yeah, the words part of it is definitely what appeals to me, because I have trouble shutting up. And I've made that work in my favor.
But you're a perfect co-host because of that exact reason.
I was bound to find uses for this someday, and I'm just glad that I've made it here. But yeah, it's that I really felt the game that I was playing.
Hit you?
Yeah, it's just I was really experiencing something, and it really stuck with me, the fact that there was not a single word spoken or even shown on screen the whole time. And yet I felt so enveloped in this story. And it wasn't even the longest story. It doesn't even have to be something that you invest in that heavily, that when you can hit the right narrative beats with a certain, apparently sort of succession of emotions, I guess, or things like that, that you really can still have somebody experience a story completely differently, just with some not exactly subtle visual aids. It's not to say that there was nothing besides, because you can't be both quiet and not have anything to look at. Then literally you're just doing nothing.
Yeah, there's still music. There's still elements to
especially the music,
the gaming, to the story, that, we still have music, we still have sound effects. There's still a lot of other things around.
Yeah, there's so much to the experience.
The visual language of the game to make a compelling story.
Yeah.
So I was wondering,
that's what stuck out with me this time.
What was the root of this? So interesting. Okay, so we will dive deeper into what the root was when we get back from the break. So guys, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
The best way to say thank you and to support us is by donating to the cause. In doing so, you'll be able to help us help fellow artists, creatives, and colleagues, promoting their work, the community as a whole, and why we got into this line of work to begin with, to not only make art, but also shine a light on our peers and the gems of the world. For all the hidden ones and the not so hidden that make life worth living, because if we can make things even a little bit better, it'll all be worth it. But we can't do this without you. So please, donate today. And remember, even a little goes a long way to build new bridges, new worlds, and new opportunities. Link and details on how can be found in the show notes below. Because together, we can do anything.
And we are back to conquer the world. And Philip, we're going to do what we always do on these kind of shows, these Is It Art shows. We're going to break.
Oh.
We're going to do a T-Bug Tangent Corner and not talk about the topic for at least 30 minutes. And then we're going to pull it back, and then we're going to go into it. No, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good. Because we're going to break it up into 3 segments like we normally do, little past, present, future. So before we get into the root of what brought you here today, per our conversation for the break, I want to talk about, I thought, well, this isn't necessarily a new phenomenon. It's an evolution of a phenomenon. And I realized that classic retro-aged games had a lot of story. Sometimes it was, they had no choice, right, Philip? Like they didn't have the technology. They didn't have maybe the
audio
time.
was not
there.
there.
There was a lot of elements that held them from, creating the story through, be it a voiceover actor or what have you, right?
Both conceptually and technologically, there were things were lacking because way back when video games were still burgeoning and we'd barely made it past, like the Super Nintendo type of era, things hadn't really become quite cinematic, as we've discussed in other shows, and as is really just markedly around I think it was the mid 90s, and if not the late 90s for sure. By the late 90s, things got very cinematic, way more narrative, just far bigger than just, red man with hat, jump on thing, go splat, like whatever.
Hey, that is fun too, though.
That was also the best beat poet that
I've
ever done.
And that has a story. You're saving the princess from the evil villain.
True.
But that is a thinly veiled story because we still had complex stories in some of these retro games. And that brings us to my first example, which is honestly just an excuse to talk about my favorite game of all time, and that is Super Metroid again, guys. If you're joining us for the first time this year because our shows are better, and they are, so stick with us. We're gonna continue to get better. God. It's going to keep getting better. But if you know us from our old shows, yes, I already ranted and raved about how much I effing love Super Metroid. But for the people that are just joining us this season or a little newer, Super Metroid is my favorite video game.
Just for your own sake, because you just got to shout it from the rooftops.
I'm in love.
You got to shout it from the mic tops.
I am in love. But yes, Super Metroid, SNES, Super NES is my favorite game of all time. And not just because it was the birthplace of a genre, we literally call it Metroidvanias to this day, but it had such an amazing story, and it had all of those beats around it that we take for granted. The music, the sound effects, all those little things. Yes, there is. I know I can hear you screaming, internet. I know there's a text scroll at the beginning, okay? But for most 99% of the game, you are given, and a little bit of voiceover, but you are given almost nothing with the gameplay. You're given
really just confirmations about like missiles retrieving or whatever.
Your hand is not being held, but right away after that, in essentially the prologue, the tutorial, if you will, of the game, you see the murdered bodies of scientists. That's storytelling visually. Like, oh my God. Yeah, like this, something horrific happened.
Environmental, I believe.
Right. And you see the broken glass that held the Metroid, the baby Metroid in it.
Red lights are flashing.
Yeah, like we're getting a lot of storytelling with very little words, very little language. And it makes you go, what the hell happened here? I have to investigate. Oh, this happened. Now I got to save the planet. Right?
Or escape the planet, really.
Or escape the planet.
You do not save that planet.
Well, technically, you're right. Technically, you're right. I guess like what I'm thinking of, like, we're saving the green creatures. I forgot what they're called. But like,
oh yeah, the little guys.
Yeah, we are hunting the bounty. We're completing the mission. There we go.
We're checking in on a previous bounty at the start of it.
Yes. So yeah, there was a lot. I know there's a million and one examples, and of course all these things evolved over time. What's a retro game that stuck out to you that you were like, "Ooh, I think this is a good one"?
I was thinking about it, and something that I haven't thought about in a long time was Abe's Odyssey.
Yes,
I
Abe's
wasn't sure. I was
Odyssey.
almost gonna be like,
Abe's
that could be like a fun inside joke where we
Yeah.
just talked about it. I'm like, what I
But
haven't thought about in
in a
forever, but
million
I just thought
years?
about for just this show out of nowhere.
Yes, Abe's Odyssey, Abe's Exodus. It is, a puzzle platformer that had a huge amount of lore. Jesus Christ.
Very
But
dark.
but yes,
Very dark.
tell the good people, give them the recap.
I mean, it's essentially classism at its finest. It's almost like a
And
story
capitalism,
right, I was gonna say it's very
slavery.
anti-capitalist where a certain alien race is exploiting another alien race for their labor, and they're just treated god awfully. They're literally just seen as you technically can't say human because everything's an alien in this, but they're seen as very less than, and you are one of them that I forget if you like somehow develop magic, like psychic powers, or just why Abe in specific was the one to like
Oh
was
yeah, there's
Mudokon
some sort of
Jesus,
lore that yeah, I like that. There's
Mudokon Moses
lore
or
that
whatever. So they
there's
escape.
like
He's
a
not like
shaman type of Madukan that
something
like
like
gives
that.
you powers or
But so yeah,
awakens them in you.
all of a sudden you're tasked with being like constantly puzzle solving throughout the environment. And so outside of that brief, intro where there's no words, they don't talk. I mean, hell, the character's mouth is sewn shut.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody says a single word from what I
I
recall, and
think
there's
he
very little.
farts. Yeah, or
Yeah,
I
the
think
game's
there's sound effects.
there's sound
There's
effects
some
for sure, but he
things.
does
Yeah.
not speak. He literally has his mouth
I
sewn
think
shut.
some creatures around him speak like "get him," it's like "get him,
You're
run."
right.
Nah,
Yeah, those
nah.
weird spidery bad guys with the masks.
Yeah,
Like they do that. They'll call out, but that's not exactly the storytelling. Again,
right,
that's just
exactly.
environmental. That's just the bad guy making
That's
his
the
little
gameplay
yeah.
essentially because you can control them
But
with those and then control their actions too.
yeah, there's a I'm sure there's a good handful, but I mean, just about every other damn thing ever though. Like yeah, there might not exactly be. Especially in older games where you just had text bubbles, like all the Final Fantasies. I mean, hell, that's
It
nothing but narrative. Those were
that is the
incredibly story heavy. It's like the
yes.
opposite
Let's talk about the opposite
because
actually
those are
for a little
linear
bit.
as hell too.
Yeah, let's talk about the opposite for a little bit because I think that'll give perspective on what we're trying to establish here and discuss. Because, yeah, Final Fantasy is a perfect example of you're reading a novel, you're reading a book, but it's split
Yeah,
up
you're
into
reading high
different.
fantasy.
Yeah, but it's split up, and because there's gameplay elements, you don't have to go into this village, village X versus village Y versus village Z to complete the final game. Sometimes with these RPGs, but the people you run into, the characters you meet, they have rich, uh, backstories and all this stuff, and you just read it. You like literally read everything. I think I was one of those kids that didn't really care for reading growing up, which is crazy because now I try to write novels for my passion
It's a pretty
project.
interesting turn of events.
And but since I was such a lover of games from a very young age, I feel like this probably helped propel some of my desire to read because you had to learn the story in a Final Fantasy or a Chrono Trigger or a Legend of Mana, potato. There was just a lot of reading back in those SNES days, and then finally we got to the PlayStation 2 era days, or PlayStation 1, I should
I mean,
say,
even
where we're
PS1, yeah,
yeah
like your
we're
Resident Evil stuff
starting
still finally
and
had like
Metal
actual human
Gear.
voiceover.
Yeah. Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, just higher, the GOAT, Final Fantasy VII, where we're getting a lot more voiceover acting, much more dialogue
Well,
heavy
Original 7 didn't
scenes,
actually
things
have
like that.
any voices,
Yeah,
but
they
still a
were
lot of
we're
that other
still
stuff,
the
especially
text
like Metal
scrolls.
Gear Solid, especially like
Yeah.
yeah, tons of things really leaned into the like we've said in earlier episodes, and as I've already said, the cinematic aspect.
Heart of Darkness, I put that into our show notes where it was a game that it was kind of like an Abe's Odyssey Exodus. Every I guess scene, that is a level, there's like a way to there's a series of puzzles that you have to figure out, and it's one of those things where you just die over and over again, and it's not like there's no lives like Super Mario Brothers. You just die until you get to the other side. You just like it is complete trial and error until you figure it out and master it. but there is a rich story there, and there is a
Well,
lot
there's
of
also
lore.
hella world building, even beyond
Yeah.
just the bare minimum of the story. When you get into some of these other games, the world building is very important, clearly. And then, of course, how can you do that without tons more of like signages and dialogue and characters and just backstory exposition, this, that, and the other. So those two are practically married to an extent unless you just ditch the medium altogether, which is I think is just rare because it used to be about that. You were trying to info dump, and it's interesting how the approach has changed.
Yeah, so we saw before we get into modern times, the present, I want to paint the picture of that bridge because yes, I feel like the industry, the gaming industry really leaned into that Metal Gear Solid, that Resident Evil. Like it was very heavy with not only storytelling through all of the other means, but yes, heavy on the narration versus the character voiceovers there, or just if some were a little more still wanted to have that retro feel, we would still just be reading a lot, right, to convey the story. And then it's when I was thinking about this piece, it's almost kind of like we have gone through a little bit of a renaissance because speed up till now, the present, we have so much new tech and graphical capabilities and music and control capabilities and sound effects. Like so much has evolved that it's almost like the game developers were like, why don't we start over with a lot of these ideas?
I do think in some situations, I probably should have. I wish I had thought about this harder and done some research beforehand. But technological limits, like literally how much can you fit in that cartridge, might have had certain impacts in the past, right? That you were talking about one Super Nintendo or N64 cartridge or whatever. Not that much stuff can fit in audio. As somebody who works in audio,
Yeah.
audio that is understandable and good is not small. It's actually crazy how certain audio types are almost just as meaty of files as anything else, including visual stuff. So that could have been part of why there was a kind of diversion in there of the era of N64 and stuff, where you had like pseudo voices, like in your Banjo Kazooie, where Banjo's speech would be on screen and it would just be like,
Right. And
like
then you were reading that.
it was
Right.
funny because it was colorful. It was their way of giving you like, oh, here's what his voice would sort of sound like, but it's keeping it fun and playful, and also not having to pay somebody to do all these lines and sit there and have to listen to too much stuff because you're here to play a fun, colorful platform in the big, colorful world of Banjo Kazooie. So
We're looking at
it's
you, Breath of the
it's
Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. They're still doing that to
I
this
know, right?
day.
Exactly. It still goes on in so many different games. People have this like pseudo speech, this like sort of fake talk, whatever. I'm sure there's even more like official terms for it somewhere. But I find that
Not that it's a
approach.
bad thing. It's
No,
just
no,
a
no. I love it.
it's just a trope
It can be
that
incredibly
yeah.
charming. That
Yeah.
whether it's like the whole time it's going, or just one quick noise at the beginning of the sentence that kind of encapsulates, like just somebody going, while their character like says angry words in a bubble. It's I like that some of that can be done artistically, and the fact that that in the gaming industry, some of that probably was first a hardware issue that they
Yeah.
worked into a creative solution by coming up with these things like these pseudo voices and like sort of workarounds to it. And I think that that's maybe some of that lingering nostalgia from that era could very well be why we ended up seeing this interesting sort of I don't want to say regression. That sounds bad.
No,
This
no,
just
renaissance,
Renaissance. Thank you. I was like,
It's a
there's a
rebirth.
much better way to say that. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
Words.
this is a
I'm Mr. Talk. You are
renaissance.
Mr. Words. Okay, we all know the dynamic here.
Hey, we are two sides of the same coin.
That's true.
We have to have that. So yeah, that brings us to why this show got pitched. So we were talking about Journey.
Philip was crying as usual.
It was so dramatic, the
It's really
story.
good though.
So yeah, that led us to discussing Journey, and then of course their entire
Catalog.
game catalog. I feel like I wish there was a better. I wish there was a. We use the word filmography for films. I wish there
Game-ography?
was like a gameography. Maybe we should just start saying that.
I think we just
I
did.
think let's just start using that.
Yeah.
So the gameography of that game company includes Flow, Flower, Journey, and the most recent entry, Sky, Children of Light, and they all kind of have this feel about them. Is they have rich stories, rich lore, rich so many things in the absence of language, in the absence of words. And they have, and a lot of it is because we have the evolution of what games are today with so many of the capabilities we never probably even imagined 20, 30 years ago. And so I want to start the discussion. I want to start this segment with, what did you think Journey meant? Like, what was the story to you? Because it's open to interpretation.
I think it was part eco disaster. Like they perverted the planet's energy as well because they just
Oh man,
exploited.
you went deep.
They
Okay.
I think they overexploited the planet to the point of it just obviously being wasteful and
Like the
making.
white creatures were real creatures?
I
Like,
think so.
okay.
And the other part of it is it's not just like biologically like or climate related, I should say, environmental, but even like a classism, like a weird civilization level struggle of the fact that some people were doing the work to build the things and like maybe who knows, like cleanse the energy, divert it, whatever, blah blah blah, and that there's always like a ruling class. There's always something, you know. So
Mhm.
there was a lot to it. They were able to convey so damn much that I see it as at least those two facets. I'm open to other interpretations, of course, but I will
Did you
agree on
meet
no
friends
less than
along
those
the
two.
way? Did you meet some new
Yeah,
people?
I mean, I think
Because
a
'Cause you're
couple.
supposed to, like, other players can tag along with your journey
Yeah,
or
yeah. If
not.
anybody else is playing it at the same time as you, it literally can just like pop you in
Yeah.
or them in. It's cool.
You got a little buddy. My Del Rio loved that. She's like, "Is this like your best friend now?" I was like, "We're best friends."
You recharge each other's like energy too. That it's cute.
Yeah.
It's like even that's got a thing about like just I don't know, like your community and your culture and just how to.
And again,
um
without language. Like, they
Yeah,
had to show you, like, there was a part I was kinda stuck on, and someone showed me how to get out of that part. Like, "Oh, this is how you do it." He or she showed me what to do.
I get for those not familiar, I will actually just go ahead and lay this out. So the game, you are this seem practically armless creature,
Entity? Yeah.
humanoid. Yeah, you're like a
Yeah.
humanoid creature. You wake up basically in the desert. You can see this mountain at the far distance,
So
and
you
you
do have
just
a
basically
goal,
know,
yeah.
and you just know that
You
you
go
have to
towards
go
the
to the
light.
peak. Yeah, you have
Yeah.
to get to the top of that mountain. And so you literally just make a beeline, and there's so many things that you come across along the way. Again, it's beautiful. You see all kinds of different like landscaping. The way that they sort of have like animals in it is cool. It's just it's a beautiful game that legitimately, yeah, just has it's got gorgeous music to it, but there's not a word said or anything like it the whole time. The only noise your character can even make is actually more of like a music note. You can press a button to go like boom, like that's it. That's all you can do
And
is
it
it's almost like
activates
singing. It's more like
things.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
more like a singing. So that's sort of the gist of the game. It's literally just find your way there. They don't tell you almost anything other than just press X to jump. I think they just literally have to make sure that you know that there's like the two buttons of just jump and like here's how you move. And then the fact that you can do that chirping or singing or whatever. So
Mhm.
again, even that insanely minimalistic, almost like nothing to look at on the screen. Again, like no, there's no points, there's nothing. You know, like almost every game you think like, oh, there's a little bit of a menu, whether that's a HP or your mana or the map, whatever. No, it's just you're just this little guy, but you're also rewarded for not only exploration, but again, acting like almost curious and environmental wise. You wake up all the critters and they like help you and stuff. And it's just really cute. I love that about it. So, and the another, speaking of technology that really plays into flow is interesting where you start off as this tiny, what would essentially be best described as a microscopic creature. It's a little more abstract than that. You kind of are still made of just like shapes, but you're essentially just a little pinchers on like a worm body. You're just as
Hmm.
simple of a creature as can be, and you used motion controls, so you literally sort of as if you were holding something like flat full of water and you were kind of guiding a thing that like maybe a bubble inside of it or whatever, if you want to think about it that way. As far as the movements you had to do, that's how you moved your character on screen. There was no buttons to push outside of like a sort of like a rush or a burst, which could include an attack if there was something in front of you that you were trying to eat or like bite. And so it was basically a killer be killed, like eat to survive. And you literally watched your character grow as you got certain amounts and certain types of different like food. You would be another segment. And then because you were long enough, you maybe started getting like different kinds of legs. And then it's just this neat sort of evolutionary flow. Haha, there's the game name. So that one was really cool. And then flower, very motion control heavy again, because that's how you move the flower pedal. But yeah, essentially it's almost like technically you control the wind because it
Mm.
starts with one petal, but then it's more like you are the petal, and you go around collecting other petals, and you try to make the biggest flower petal cloud you can before you finish the game level. And there's 6 of them, but it's just again, it's beautiful and it's really neat the way that they built something about the momentum, like, because there's musicality to the game and the fact that you are this very kinetic wind movement thing, like rushing around picking up flowers, the music even, like, changes and adapts to whether you're moving fast or slow and, like, how many pedals you have, like, it's almost like it
That's the
adds more
beauty of this
instruments.
medium
Yeah,
too.
so it's not nearly as narrative, which Flow isn't either. Those don't have as clear of stories. Flower has hints of environment, well, not even hints. They basically go from a beautiful outdoors to a clogged cityscape where the people seem miserable. So that's part of why I got environmental slash just human wellness vibes from Journey 2, I suppose, because Flower was big on it.
Yeah.
And Flower was also really cool, but it wasn't like Journey just each one of these they're getting better exponentially, not just like by small amounts. So like Journey was amazing.
Going back to Journey before we move on, in terms of, when it comes to the engine that is the game and the gameplay and what the game does when you don't even realize it's a little more in control. Like, for example, when you're going up that mountain and eventually you get to this point where you're kind of going through these very sandy, or excuse me, snow covered like dunes and mountainside and things like that, and it you could feel how hard it was. I could emote with what the character was going through because I it felt hard to even control him in that snow, and I know that he was having a hard time going through the snow to reach the mountain peak to
Oh
get to
yeah,
the light.
blizzards
And
up a hill, up a
and then,
mountain.
yeah, once it, like, at the very, very end, it gets to this point where you're like, "Is the game crashing or glitching?" Like, you feel like you're just walking into this mist for what feels like way too long for a game to allow you to do that, and it's clearly purposeful to really create that motion in you, that they're trying to immerse you, and you become truly the character, and you feel like you're climbing this mountain. To me, it was I've always liked the metaphors on just life. Like, this is, what we go through in the span of a lifetime. But I did agree with a lot of what you thought, because I'm like, why would they have all the lore? Like, if when you did explore some of these vistas, you would come to these, like, what should we call them, murals that gave part of the story.
Yeah, like the murals, almost
And
shrines. It's
and
like
there
almost
was
like
and
both.
I think what was big, yeah, what was big to me storytelling wise was there was this great war that these people went through, clearly, with these giant machines. And we see some of the remnants of these machines as we're going through the mountain. And to me, I couldn't, as much as I'm not a religious person by nature and in my real life,
I'm shocked, I say.
I couldn't help but find the religious undertones to all of this. Like, almost like
Yeah.
this is a spirit of these people that went to war, and you're trying to get the spirit to their version of heaven or nirvana or moksha. Because there's really nothing after the game once we get to the mountain peak, when we, like, he's literally going to the light. I mean, how much more religious can you get? So to me, there is an afterlife element. You're learning why it got to this point. I feel like, through a lot of the game and the lore, but you are now maybe the soul of these creatures, the spirit of these creatures, if you will. To me, it was a lot less about just the life, like, or the journey that is life, from childhood to adulthood to, golden years to eventual death. To me, it said more about what these people, we'll call them the white creatures, went through. So, there's no right or wrong answer, and that's, again, we're always pretentious nerds on this show when we have to make this statement. This is why it's art, because it's open to interpretation. It tries to just transcend just its medium, to evoke emotion, to make you think, and because it's open to interpretation, just like a painting on a wall in a museum. It's your discovery that makes it so artistic and gives it so much of that quality and those merits and value. So there was a lot of I had fun, honestly, thinking of all the other little titles that are kind of I wouldn't say in their shadow, probably just like they're parallel to each other, right? There's a lot of other titles that I was like, oh man, there's a lot of great stories in this renaissance of gaming right now that we get to enjoy without, in the absence of language. Some examples that I found where I've played a few of them. So I've played Little Nightmares. I've talked about that on the show before. Planet of Lana has a great story with absolutely pretty much no dialogue. There's some like sound effects things, but it's pretty much languageless. And then Limbo, Inside, Abzu. There's a lot of cross pollination, and there's just a lot of the same DNA, and it makes for an amazing, storytelling experience.
Hyper Light Drifter is one.
Ooh,
That's a
okay.
pretty rad game. And Tunic, interestingly, they're both
Oh yes, okay.
what's that? It's not isometric. Is it when you have that like that downward angle
Yeah, it's
view?
isometric.
Okay, I was gonna say
Yeah,
like that seems too obvious, but good, my brain just knows that.
I think.
Yeah, they're
Ooh,
they're
now
both that type
now I'm second guessing.
of whatever. It's the top down. They're both
The
Zelda-like.
top
They're
down
both
Zelda like.
Zelda-ish.
Yes, yeah.
Tunic very much so. Tunic is adorable, very fun. But yeah, both of those. It's tons of world building,
And I guess
and
Silk
there's
Song
no
and Nine Souls, kind of that Metroidvania.
true,
They
they
have a
have
lot
that
of
feel,
story.
but
Yeah.
as far as it legitimately having, like, no not even English language, but literally just, it's not like they couldn't translate it, but
I haven't played those last two though. Is there like text scrolls where you're reading stuff, or
no.
is it no language,
No,
no
it's very
words?
much through, like, visuals and other methods of storytelling, kind
Yeah,
of
okay.
similar to Journey and, like,
Yeah.
other stuff that we've talked about. They're super fun, and, yeah, there's nothing that they're not able to, like, get across, especially the way that Tunic interacts with you, because part of the fun of that game is where you're building what looks like an old school, like, pause menu.
Mm,
So the more
okay.
documents you find, the more stuff you learn about the game, but it actually even tells you, like, secrets. But none of it's still in English, but it was somewhat decipherable. So that was
Yeah.
what's kind of fun, is you do actually start to recognize patterns. So there's like a hint of language to Tunic in a really clever, like, fun way, because it has some insane puzzles. Like, I absolutely looked some of it up. It's insane.
Yeah.
There's my one for the episode. But Hyper Light Drifter as well. It was very like esoteric, in its approach of just barely even symbols on screen, very like bonkers sci-fi, not quite time travel, but just Hyper Light Drifter it's out there, but it was really, really cool. So I do recommend those two as far as silent storytelling goes in the modern age.
You know what? And I think I'm glad we talked about this because I feel like there is a take home message for the audience. As these mediums evolve, I am starting to think that maybe gaming will be the best at this, because film used to do this, right? That old
Yeah,
Hitchcockian, um, you know,
I was thinking that
um,
exact thing.
yeah, the Hitchcockian method or mantra, if you will, that it's like you should be able to tell a story without any words at all. A modern example of this, but still has some words, but almost very minimal, is like Fury Road. Like Mad Max Fury Road has very, very little dialogue in it. We're pretty much watching a car chase through the whole film. Like you could literally watch that film and kind of get the plot without any of the dialogue at all.
Yeah,
and
100%.
and I feel like since there is a gameplay element, since you get to control these characters.
Yeah, to have long stretches of like no words, but you're still that much more engaged if you're playing the character. Like,
Yes,
brilliant.
talk about immersion, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what has always made me gravitate. Like my my mom used to like make fun of me, still kind of makes fun of me a little bit to this day. Mom, if you're listening, I love you. But she's always said, like, you're still playing video games. Like I'm about to say goodbye to my 30s and jump into my 40s here pretty soon. And my mom still kind of teases me like, you're still playing video games. And I'm like, I think we have surpassed this, like, it's just for kids thing, and or that it's just for boys. Plenty of women are huge gamers these days too. And I think part of that is because the medium has evolved. It's not just Pong. It's not just it's not just purely a game. There's story. There's you find thrills. It's entertainment, and I'm so excited for the future of this because it could be the king. It could be the king of storytelling. This medium could be the king of storytelling because of that extra feature that is gameplay. So, on that note, let's talk about the future. What do you think the future holds for this medium when we get into things like augmented reality, virtual reality, the metaverse? We already feel like we're some of these characters, but what's if we truly could be them?
Well, no, it's not quite a whelp moment, but yeah, I'm just trying to measure out my words accordingly.
I know
There's
that's a heavy
the
question.
the yeah, there's a lot to that, and it's like the technology is essentially caught up between
Yes.
actual hardware wise, the amount of VR, the amount of immersion that we've been able to provide people now on a just like commercial scale. Well, cool. It's about as accessible as it's ever like could possibly get. Like it's only going to get ridiculous to where it'll somehow become the norm, possibly at least for privileged people. Therefore, people have always been making like good games that won't stop either, and so you will get that. Although there is an aspect of the gaming, like literally just the technicality of what do you do, like how do you make the game go and function? Do you need a controller or not? That I think it'll always kind of have some kind of impact on it. But I like that it really is the sky's the limit. It's almost just like
Yeah.
carte blanche to say, yeah, here's here's any control scheme you could want. Like visuals have never been easier to make. Like people would practically just crank this crap out with AI given another 3 years, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Um,
the AI itself will build it,
yeah,
right?
and
Yeah.
it'll be too easy to make, but it'll be very hopefully like approachable, and I like it going that direction. But I'm very happy with my retro experiences. If they can keep giving me stuff like Hyperlight Drifter, Tunic, or other more verbal stuff like what was that, Death's Door, the Crow game.
Oh, yeah.
Some of those
Yes.
some of those are rad. So I don't need that stuff, but I'm really curious to see what people do with it because that's
I
powerful.
think there will always be a market for that. And I think a good example of that is I remember when everything went, 3D. There was there was Mario 64 and there was everything was 3D. And there was such a hunger, I think, for that 2D old school scrolling. Let's just get to the end of the level and get through these obstacles. And then I started noticing Nintendo do the new Super Mario Brothers and
Yep,
new Super Mario Brothers
they've
U,
returned.
and and
And even
and
versions of Paper Mario,
yeah,
where it's still
yeah,
kinda
where
back
I
and
was
forth.
like,
It's not quite so,
there's
like, open
still a
world.
market for this.
Mhm.
Of course, yes, we love the Last of Us, that took storytelling to a brand new level, but it's so heavy in dialogue and language and the need for
I
words.
mean, even the Metroid Prime trilogy,
Yeah,
was still practically, like, wordless, at least the first one, and what stuff you saw on screen was almost never, like, legitimately written in understandable English UI, like, it was all very
yeah.
actual alien, so I like that they continued that to an extent from the original NES and Super NES Metroid games. There technically was a little bit of talking, but never from Samus. In the Dread, like,
Mhm.
but
I love
it's
Dread because that's old school. That's
yeah,
old school,
and
baby.
again, it just still goes to show that you just got to keep innovating or finding your own wrinkle and doing different things to the game to where it still was a Metroid game and it always felt that way and it had this completely different element that still didn't need any like talking or dialogue for the most part. It also didn't talk or do anything. It was just this that made it creepier. It was the silent stalker. It was really cool, so that it fit with their usual vibe. I love that they
Yeah.
didn't stop, innovating, and they're continuing to take even just Metroid into cool places. So yeah, people are gonna continue to create and use their imaginations, and we'll get some
Oh,
really
yeah.
really neat stuff out of it that'll appeal to our classic senses, and they'll blow our minds.
Absolutely. I think you said it best when you said sky is the limit. And I like that we we started with Metroid and we ended with Metroid. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for listening and we want to hear from you. What do you guys think? What does the future hold? What is I we both Philip and I know that there's a million and one other examples of amazing titles that have amazing stories without any words or language at all. leave it in the comments.
Too
Let
many
us know
for
what
any
we
one or two
missed.
guys
Yeah.
to list, So help us
Yeah.
out.
So with that being said, yeah, thank you so much for listening. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Philip Church. And if you guys like that, you know what to do. You can always check some of our stuff out at novodayproductions.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow. You know what to do. If you want to get a hold of Mr. Philip, how do they do it?
philipchurch.com, just one L in Philip. And that's where I've got my demos and my contact me stuff. So check it out, if you please. Thank you very much.
Check it out, guys. And if you'd like to sponsor a little love child or be on the show, you can always reach out to us at novadayproductions@gmail.com. So until next time, you know what to do. Be good to each other, as always, and good luck and Godspeed. We'll see you in the next one. We love y'all.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is our go-to tool for remote podcast recordings. What's great is that you can record separate audio and video tracks, and it's all backed up on a secured cloud, so you never lose your hard work. Even better, it's easy to use, and there's nothing to download. So go to zencastr.com, zencastr.com, and use promo code Art of the Beholder to get 30% off your first 3 months with a pro account. Are you ready to elevate your style and make a lasting impression in fashion? Ready for change? To find the best you? Whether it's creating stunning designs or crafting the perfect wardrobe, AP Design is here to transform your vision into reality. From everything from sustainable goods to personal consulting, Alexandra Parsons of AP Design aims to bring innovation and elegance to your every project. So let her help you stand out with ideas that are bold, timeless, and uniquely yours. To get started, you can go straight to her shop with the link below in the show notes, or you can book a consultation at alexandra-parsons.com and let your new life start today. That's Alexandra, Alexandra-Parsons, Parsons.com. Because great design isn't just seen, it's felt.